I'm a little concerned because I don't see anyone joining the webinar right now.
Well, it's not quite on the hour, so I wouldn't necessarily expect anyone to join until it's actually
I mean, most
on
webinars
time.
usually see a lot of people coming in, but
Hmm.
okay, there we go. Maybe they wait till it's closer to the time. We're just going to give it a few more minutes,
Sure.
let people join in. Then I'll make a few housekeeping announcements. Well, we are right on the hour, but welcome, good morning, good afternoon to those who are here. I think I'm going to give it another minute or two, Charlie, just
Yeah.
to let
Yeah.
people
Let
continue
people come
joining.
in.
Also, this particular webinar is an hour earlier than our typical webinars. So I hope people have noted that in their invite. Usually our webinar's at noon. Today it's at 11 Eastern time. Thanks for joining today. It's just after 11. I think I'm going to give it one more minute until we get started. Is that okay with you, Charlie? I don't want to delay
Yeah,
like too
absolutely.
much.
No, let's yeah, yeah.
Okay.
People a chance to come in.
Yep. All right. Well, I'll do my little housekeeping bit. Hopefully, a few more people will join. Thanks for joining, everybody. My name's Stephanie Kushner. I am part of the business development team here at TPGI. And today, we're going to be doing the three-step accessibility program with Charlie Pike. I'm going to do a few housekeeping items now and then turn it over to Charlie. This session is being recorded. We'll email everyone the recording after the event. For those that registered and are not here, they will also be getting the recording. We do have captions available, so feel free to use them as needed. We will have time for live Q&A. Please use the Q&A box, and we will answer as many of the questions as we can at the end of the presentation. We sometimes miss the questions if they're put in the chat, although I will try to monitor the chat as well. So just please, if you can, use the Q&A box. Lastly, I'd also like to mention if anyone needs any accessibility support, training, usability testing, or wants to learn more about our tools, I will be sending out an email with a link to this to schedule a time to speak with one of our experts after the webinar. With that, I am going to turn it over to Charlie Pike to get started and provide an introduction of himself.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thanks everybody for coming along today. My name is Charlie Pike. I'm the Director of Platform Success here at TPGI, which essentially means I'm if you like, the liaison between our platform, the ARC platform that I'm going to talk about today, and our various products, and our customers, making sure they're successful with the products and get the most value from them. And today I'm going to be talking about a three-step accessibility program and showing you a demonstration of that in action in our accessibility resource center, which is our platform for accessibility. So just a quick agenda. So we're going to give you an overview of the central idea that I'm talking around today. And then we're going to go through each of those major steps in terms of an overall accessibility program: discover, solve, and manage. And what I mean by those, okay, and obviously they're very broad steps, but we have worked with, I've been working in accessibility since the early noughties, worked with an awful lot of very large organizations and smaller organizations. And there are trends that we've seen, and this really comes out of that. And then once I've talked you through what we mean by those terms and how they fit with managing different kinds of programs, I will give you a demo of that in action and how it can be done with our platform. And after that, as Stephanie said, we'll go through any questions that you've raised and in the Q&A, and I'll try to answer them as best I can at that point. So this is a slide that I show a lot in my various presentations, and that is the analysis onion. And what it means here, what I mean by this metaphor here, is essentially there are different layers to accessibility analysis, okay, and different levels of analysis that you can do, and they each have their part to play, and they each can be very effective. But you can't really do any of these things alone. If you want a complete picture of accessibility and you want to manage a large scale accessibility program, you need to be really utilizing all these aspects of analysis, but in the right places, because you won't be able to do it efficiently. You can't do all of these things all of the time by any means. So on that outer layer, the outermost layer here, the broadest layer, is the domain scans, or what we call the domain scans in the ARC world. And they are your automated testing of a broad amount of content, templates, etc. So by domain scan, we mean, obviously your whole domain. It could be hundreds of pages, thousands of pages. I was talking to a customer yesterday in a university, and they have they have perhaps 10,000 websites. They don't know how many websites are in the university. It's a common problem, particularly for large universities. So you're talking about broad scale, and you're really trying to look for big trends. Then you're trying to look at where things, where your priorities lie, where you've got particular problems, how work is progressing at a broad scale, and particularly you're looking at process. Okay, so automated scanning in accessibility, you're probably familiar. It only really checks, maybe 20, maybe 30% of issues, depending on the kind of content that you're testing. But it's very, very good for showing you this broad picture, as I say, because you can scan an awful lot of content and you can start to see trends. And I'll talk about that in terms of discovery. User flows are a more zoomed in, more detailed layer. That's where you pull out something like a key flow. If you were, for example, a hotel website, that might be your booking flow. And it's your key user flow that users need to complete. But user flows also, you can focus on specific templates. So when you scan user flows, and again, we're talking typically about automated testing here. When you scan user flows, you're testing your header, your footer, particular templates or interactive components, a dialog box, a data table, so on, as samples of the widgets that are in your site or your application. Okay, so it's a more zoomed in view, and very often you might use your domain scans to first discover what user flows you're going to scan, what you're going to look at in closer detail. Okay, and then a much deeper layer than that in your analysis would be your manual expert audits. Manual expert audits are something that we at TPGI do day in, day out. Okay, we have very large teams constantly doing these audits. They are the only way to get a complete picture of your compliance when it talks to just looking at how compliant you are Section 508 with the EAA, with any of these regarding usually connected to the WCAG guidelines. If you want to know whether your website or your application is compliant, then you're going to have to do a complete manual test against all of the various guidelines and criteria. Okay, these you can't do all the time. They're pretty exhaustive. So you need to be strategic about when and how you do those. Okay, and the scanning can actually help you identify again when and where you need to do that, and to also, once you've completed manual audits, to actually monitor progress with the fixing of the issues that have been found during the audits. And then finally, there's a core layer of analysis, which is the real gold at the center here, which is things like assistive technology testing, like testing with JAWS, with other screen readers, with your screen magnifiers, etc. User feedback, getting feedback directly from users on the usage of your site, and user research, if you could do it, because ultimately the ultimate arbiter of how accessible your site is or your application is not going to be any compliance guidelines. It's going to be the users themselves. Okay, and understanding the challenges that they have. That's going to tell you whether not only is it compliant, but is it fully accessible in the sense that it's usable with the assistive technologies. Okay, so those are the parts, and as I said, those bits of analysis, they're all necessary as part of a complete accessibility program, but you obviously can't be doing them all the time. So we're going to talk about places and strategic ways in which you can actually apply those different types of analysis. So the 3 steps that I talked about: discover, solve, and manage. So the first one is discovery. So a lot of organizations will start here. They want to first find out where they sit. Okay, and discovery is all about, first of all, getting a baseline set up, understanding where you are in a normal state. And that's why you do, you use a lot of accessibility scanning, automated testing in this phase. You're trying to go broad rather than deep at first, trying to understand what's going on, and you're looking at trends, particularly to see how accessibility changes. For example, when you have releases, if you have releases every 2 weeks, what does that do? Is there a spike in your accessibility and so on? So you can understand what processes are contributing to accessibility. So typically when you do discovery, you're scanning a lot of stuff, you're setting it up to scan, you're finding other things and then scanning more deeply into those things. And you're trying to get a sense maybe over a period of 3 months, 6 months of what's your baseline. Okay. And then once you have your baseline, then you can have some insight into what you can actually see. Okay. And the screenshot that I have here at the moment is the dashboard. I'll be showing this to you during the demo. And your dashboard is the place where you can see these changes. You can look across your site. So this dashboard actually rolls up all of the different things that you're scanning with ARC so that you can see your scores at that level. And there's various ways you could step down through your content with the domain monitoring here. And then I mentioned that there's a deeper level of monitoring, which is the user flow monitoring. And that's typically where you're looking at specific components, right? You might be looking at particular templates of your site and separating those out. You might be looking at widgets. You know, we have one customer using these user flows to essentially scan the widget library. They have a third-party vendor supplying widgets to their application, and they separate those widgets out. They isolate them. You can see from the screenshot here, this is the creation of a component, a dialog box for creating a component in a user flow. And you essentially identify by CSS selector or some other method exactly what you're testing and define the pattern. What is it? Why are you testing it? Well, it's an example of a data table, or it's an example of a carousel widget. So this customer, has pulled out all the various widgets, examples of all the widgets that this vendor is supplying to them, and they can scan those and then go back to the vendor and go, look, we found these problems with your widgets. Can you fix them? That's one use of a user flow. And as I said, it's a more zoomed in view. So you generally identify those things when you're doing the broader domain scan and then focus in using user flow monitoring. Again, that is automated testing. Then that third layer, the engagements. And engagements are really our term for manual expert audits. And as I mentioned, that's where you're doing a full WCAG and Section 508 compliance testing. Okay, you're testing against all the criteria. It's somebody doing that. You might combine that with manual testing, but they will be testing with the assistive technologies as well. And they'll be checking against everything and raising issues accordingly. So that's exhaustive, and you need to do that more sparingly. Typically, you'd be doing that on the basis of, let's say, a user flow you've already identified, your key templates. So when we do engagements in TPGI, we would generally select maybe between 20 and 30 individual components that are representative of the whole. So we're trying to capture all of the unique UI in the application and test those and in doing so, we usually capture all of the accessibility issues. The other element of testing that you can do, of course, is the same automated testing, but in for developers, where you're actually testing as part of your development pipeline, maybe at your lower environments. And in that case, you can integrate our ARC rules. So we have a rule set that we use. We also support in our platform, by the way, we support the ACTS rules. But we have our ARC rules. So no matter what you're using, what aspect of ARC you're using, be it one of our integrations using CI/CD, or whether it's, for example, our ARC toolkit, which I'll show you in a bit, you're using exactly the same rules. So everybody's testing the same thing and getting the same results. And that's key, because one of the things that you want in any accessibility program is line of sight. If you're not looking at the same data or doing the same tests or applying the same fixes, if you like, to your code, then it's very difficult for anyone managing the program to see it with any depth into what you're doing, because it's different data and it's hard to normalize that data. So it's very, very important that everybody's using, at the very least, the same rule set throughout. And that's how you get that consistency in that line of sight. These are great ways, by the way, of introducing accessibility gradually into an organization. Testing is a great way to introduce teams and development teams to accessibility. And I'll be talking a little about the ARC toolkit, a screenshot here of the ARC toolkit. Great way to gradually introduce them. If they can just do a certain amount of tests and then add more tests as you go along, they begin to understand the challenges around accessibility. And most developers can themselves come up with solutions once they understand what the problem is. When it comes to assistive technology testing, we have a tool called JAWS Inspect. And JAWS Inspect is a dedicated JAWS testing tool. So it's JAWS, but designed for testers. So they don't need to learn the complexities of the user tool, that is JAWS. Instead, they just have very, very specific and simple to use interface, which gives them transcripts of the JAWS speech. And the advantage of that is, A, they have time to look through it and understand whether it's correct or there's problems with it. And also it's easy to share. Okay, so here we've got an image on the Amazon website, and we've got next to it on the left-hand side, we have the actual JAWS speech, Amazon device deals, and link graphic, which is that helper speech that JAWS gives the user to give them the context for what they're reading out. And that is all available in text. So if that's not right, if that content is not good, for instance, it's bad alt text, is too verbose or whatever, or it's not descriptive, then you can simply select that and share that with your developers. Say, hey, we've got a problem here, testing with JAWS. JAWS Inspect is also, not only is it good for doing that AT testing, but it's also a great introduction to accessibility for teams as well. It's very easy to use. So once you've done all these layers of testing, you're getting, as I said, your baseline in discovery. And then you're moving into a phase that you're really starting to solve things. And that's where the Knowledge Center comes in. Okay, the Knowledge Center is your one-stop shop for all aspects of accessibility in terms of best practice, technical techniques for addressing accessibility, understanding the problems that users face and why they're important, and also a complete training platform with complete course on all aspects of accessibility, from simple introductions to accessible design to setting policies and so on. And that is all available to integrate into your learning management system if it needs be. So you have on the one hand the knowledge base and its articles, which will give you exhaustive but very concise guidance on everything around accessibility. You really don't have to look outside of this to find what you need to know. And then to embed the skills and knowledge long-term, you've got the tutor for the training to actually build up knowledge inside your organization. So the knowledge base is the articles, and then tutor is the training. And as I said, that can be integrated in with SCORM into a learning management system, into your own courseware. So that's once you're going to fix, then you use all of that knowledge that's available to you to get things fixed correctly. And then you're really going to go into a phase where you're managing your program. Okay, so you're starting to do a bit of work. You're starting to get things better and improve your accessibility by solving issues. And then you want to start getting as many involved in your accessibility program as possible. So you want very, very custom reporting. You want to be able to report up to your executive team, etc., on how your accessibility is progressing. But you're going to want to be able to report to teams as well on what's relevant to their role in the organization and what work they need to do. This is all part of pushing the accessibility effort upstream. Okay, and when you manage to push it upstream and get away from just having some central team that's entirely responsible for accessibility, once you do that, you're effectively, in a way, taking away accessibility or having it melt into your organization as just a practice, okay? To the point where it's not a thing anymore, it's just something that you do and everybody does. That's where you want to get to. The key here is to set up the roles correctly, make sure the right information is going into the right hands, and everybody is doing their part of the work, whether it's the designers, your UX team, your developers, your managers, your product teams, your scrum masters, whatever. All of them should have the right level of support. They should be doing the right level of tests, and gradually they should be responsible for things like their own manual testing over time. And in ARC, we have a lot of different ways that you can set up roles. You can entirely customize the roles to reflect your organization. So you can set up roles, organize what they can view and what they can manage, and set up all your sources being all that analysis that I was showing you at the start during discovery, your domain scans, user flows, engagements. All of those things are sources, and you can set your roles in your organization to access particular sources or groups of sources. And I'll be showing you that as part of the demo. So this, just the last slide here, this is what I call the accessibility assembly line. Obviously, there are many different types of software life cycles, and every organization is different, and usually they have more steps than this. But these are sort of general trends, and it's just an illustration to give you an idea of how all this might work harmoniously in a living system, if you like. So as a first phase in the diagram I have here, we have monitoring, and that's where that dashboard that I showed you the screenshot of earlier really comes in. So the accessibility team, or those responsible for the accessibility in your organization, really want to be in a state where they're monitoring, okay, broadly. They're not necessarily involved directly in testing because they need to be able to manage. So they're monitoring, they're tracking progress, they're prioritizing. And as things get released to your production sites, then they are testing those with ARC, with the automated scans, and they're looking for trends or changes in trends. We also have a JAWS Connect service where you can actually gather feedback directly from users. So that's one way to gather feedback, and that helps you to prioritize things. Users have flagged particular problems, that immediately goes top of the list. It's a priority to resolve. Okay. And likewise, during the planning phase, you have JAWS Inspect, and you can use JAWS Inspect again to identify issues that are really affecting users, as opposed to just a compliance question that may have very limited effect on the user's experience. You're looking for things that are really impacting users, and you're prioritizing those. Then the ARC Toolkit, our free browser plugin, can be used by developers and content authors at very deep levels because it runs on the desktop, doesn't need outside network access. The ARC Toolkit being used day by day directly on templates, directly on content management systems, wherever things are being put together, templates being put together, and test as they go. Again, using the same rules as the ARC monitoring. So whatever you're doing here, you'll get the same results as what the program manager is watching in the ARC monitoring. And then you commit your code and you have a test phase. And in the test phase, JAWS Inspect can be used to do quick checks, a kind of QA layer of testing. It's very quick, easy, and doesn't require a lot of knowledge. Okay, you can test things like content structure, labels, alternate text, these kinds of things very quickly, which means you can do it all the time on every release. And then also you will have our integrations that I mentioned earlier, the likes of our Playwright integration, the ARC API, our Node.js integration. All of these can be used to test the commits and maybe set policies where you can accept or reject code based on particular accessibility policies as you go along. Okay, so that's a kind of ideal system where the testing is being done all in the right places and there's no significant effort. So that's a kind of state that you want to get to. Now I'm going to switch over and start to look at the ARC interface itself. So here we are. This is the ARC portal. This is a cloud-based portal, and this is essentially, and I'll go onto the home page. This is essentially where you would be overseeing your accessibility program from here. Okay. This is a new, if any of you have seen ARC before, this is actually our new release of the platform. So we have it just in beta with a few customers at the moment. We've literally just come out the door with this, and it's still a lot of features being added as we speak. But the goal with this rebuild is really speed and performance. So we've hugely increased the performance of the ARC portal. It can handle vast amounts of data, but also it's become a lot easier to get to the information that you need. There's less steps, so it's more efficient in every sense. Okay, speedier in terms of getting data, scanning data, finding data, and much more flexible about the data it gets. But then also it's just that much easier for the accessibility folks to get quickly to the data that they need. Okay, and again, we've got this notion, there's 3 steps. We've got discover, solve, and manage. And for the discovery, we have our dashboards that pulls all the data together, all those layers of the onion, right? Your engagements, your domain scans, your user flows can all be rolled up directly into the dashboards. And then when it comes to fixing things, as I mentioned, we have our knowledge center. This is all here available to all the users in the system with our training as well. So all the information that you need is here. Really the goal with ARC is to make sure that it's a one-stop shop. You can manage your entire program from here, and all the related tools that can be installed across the system all converge here and become data sources for ARC, feeding into ARC. And then when it comes to the manage stage, you can set up projects, add teams or roles to those projects. Where here we've got an example of team members and a UX team that we've added to be able to watch or manage this particular web store data source, which is a website. Okay, so you can set those up. You can create roles that you need, whatever they be, executive team, UX team, design team, and give them access to different parts of the data sources depending on what they need. And then you can manage the program and roll it out to teams in a very manageable way without being overwhelming, okay, step by step, which is really how you have to go here. So going back to the home page here, as I said, the key with this, if you like, this new version of ARC is really simplicity and getting quickly to the data. We have here our getting started section. This will actually feature videos and links to the most used steps, things like setting up users, inviting them to the platform, setting up some kind of monitoring on your website, your user flows, etc. You'll get there quickly from here. And we have our WCAG density score here. So your WCAG density score is an average of the number of accessibility findings or issues across all your various sources and data. Okay, so it gives you some sense of how issues are spread, but it also gives you a marker in the sand, if you like, of how you're doing so that you can see progress over time or lack of progress, as is the case here, right, where the accessibility has gotten worse. This trend line view is key. Understand that this here on the front page is a roll-up of everything that you are scanning here. And I'm an admin user here, so I can see all of the data in ARC that's feeding up. And this is key for program managers because they really, the first thing they want when they come into the platform, maybe every week or every couple of weeks or whatever, is to see what's changed and how the trends are going. Okay, if you've got a lot of stuff to manage, that's the first thing you want to be able to see. Is the accessibility going in the right direction? If there's an increase there, what happened? Did we release something? Did we change something? Did we not do the testing that we should have done before we released? Why has this gone up? Okay, this is the kind of indicator that helps you manage and maintain, gain the oversight of your program. We have recommended reading, and these again are the articles. So everything from our knowledge base, all of the content is essentially available in context throughout the platform and in all of our tools. Okay, so you get that consistency of data. And here it's recommending content based on, and here's an example of an article here, based on issues that have come up on the system while you're scanning. Okay, that's our recommended reading. And finally, all your automated testing activity is down here so that you can watch the progress with that. So if you've set up a bunch of domain scans and user flow scans, you can make sure that they're working correctly when they're running, etc., and manage your overall data analysis. Okay, so that's your jumping off point, and then you go quickly into your dashboard where you'll be doing your discovery phase. So again, you've got your trend line, which is the key piece of data, and this is again a roll up of everything I can see. If I had a role which restricted my view to only certain projects, then I would see a roll up for just the projects that I have access to. Okay, in this case, I've got two sources, a total of 43 components. So a component could be a full page, or it could be an individual dialog box, you know, just part of a page. And instances are cases of a particular issue. So for instance, we've got an issue here of no link text, and it appears, this finding appears in 34 components, and there are 143 in those components. There are 143 individual instances of that specific issue. Okay, so that's how we break it down. And there's the overall WCAG density score between the two sources. So as I said, the idea here is that you can drill down into the data quickly. When you're doing discovery, you're going to find a lot of data. That university example, you know, it could be thousands and thousands of things. You're never going, in that case, you're never going to be able to see everything. In fact, they don't know everything that they have at the end of the day. But at least they'll be getting some kind of handle on the challenge, okay, by looking at this data. And you get straight in to the specific issues themselves so that you can see the common issues across the board. So you're immediately seeing what are your common issues. You can look at specific sources where they actually occur in. Remember, we're doing different kinds of analysis here. And you can start dig down into these issues and have a look at where they occur. And this view will often tell you, so here's an actual website scan that we're doing. Here's a page on that scan. And I can also, I've got a user flow in here, a shopping cart flow for this web store, and I can see where that occurs, where there's instances of the issue in there. So I immediately get a sense of the occurrences of the issue. And very often this will tell you a lot, because if you recognize, you know, it's a no image role, if you recognize from the numbers and the occurrence, you might realize, okay, yes, that's an issue in the header because it's appearing throughout in all the pages, or that's an issue in the content on the home page because there's a lot of instances there. Okay, and we can dig straight in. And when we look at this no image role, so we've only made one click, we're right into the detail of this particular issue. We can see that it occurs across both sources in 41 components. We get the detail on what the issue is, okay? But we also get all the related content from our knowledge base. So as I said, these appears in context. So I can open this up and I can get all the information I need on how to provide the correct image role, okay? With examples here of code techniques and recommendations. This content is being updated on a constant basis. We have a dedicated team doing this. Again, everything you need to know, what it is, who it affects, how best to code to fix the problems, and all the related information, even how to test this specific issue if you're doing tests. So you really need to look no further, but you'll note as well that all of this is pretty concise. Okay? It's really designed to be practical, quick, easy to understand, but also comprehensive. Okay, and below that in our table now, we're looking at all the pages that have that specific issue. And here, for example, from our shopping cart flow or user flow, we can see that the issue occurs in the header. And here we can see the source code where it occurs. Okay. And we wouldn't typically recommend actually that you necessarily have your development teams into the platform to do all the specifics with these issues. We have other tools where you're better at identifying issues and fixing them and then retesting. For example, our Arc Toolkit, which is the browser plugin that I mentioned. This is a free tool. All your teams can install this. As I said, it runs on the desktop because it's an Arc browser. It's a browser extension. So therefore, you don't have to worry about running it on things that, for instance, haven't gone to production yet, templates, etc. So I can just run tests on my pages. I'm testing the same web store, same rules. So I'll find my the issues, for example, this no link text issue that was raised by the platform. It's right here, and I get a visualization on the page of where the issue occurs and simple explanation of what it is and where in the code. So I don't need to be that familiar with WCAG. Things are organized by topics I can easily understand as a developer or content author, and I can test and retest as I go along. I can test these things, fix them, retest, and then finally, when it's all done, send it up to production. And then I, in here, should see these issues start to disappear when I'm scanning. Okay, so this is a good way, a good example of how to manage your accessibility program. You're doing the monitoring of production here. Your teams are using various tools in their development environments and content authoring systems, and they're testing and retesting, and then you're looking at the results of those changes and making sure that it's resulting in better trends, better accessibility. Okay, as I said, that's user flows, etc. Web complete website scans and user flows, and the user flows can be interactive. So you can actually use Selenium type commands in user flows to test interactive elements. So for instance, Arc would be able to play the user, if you like, open a dialog box, scan that dialog box for accessibility, and then close that dialog box again. You can set up those scripts here, and then you can scan those on a monthly basis or an ongoing basis, and they'll appear in your data just as the overall website scans and domain scans appear, and you can identify issues in just the same way. So I can focus in here on, for example, the search suggestions box, which appears here. If I just close this, okay, when I type something in here, it's obviously going to update the suggestions. I can capture that here and then scan it and find out if there are issues with that content. And it all rolls up nicely into my dashboard here, so I can see all of the data. Okay, the beauty is that I can then filter that content and look at it any way that I want. I'll come back to this in a little bit, but essentially I can set up views. I can filter according to projects, WCAG levels, really all of the different things you'd want to filter by, and save those in different views. And then I can access those views here and change what I'm seeing. So even though there's an exhaustive amount of data here, I can quickly set it up to see exactly what I want to see. Okay, so it's highly customizable and very quickly customizable. That's the beauty of it. Then once I've done my discovery and I've understood my baseline, so I'm scanning a lot of stuff, I'm understanding what's typical situation. I can then, as I said, start to solve. So this knowledge-based content that I mentioned, this is all of this content which covers all aspects of accessibility, really, and everything you need to do from a developer, content author perspective in here is available both as a library here in the Knowledge Center and in context in our various tools. Okay, same information. This is maintained by our Knowledge Center team. They work on just this and the rules constantly. So these are constantly being updated and improved based on new information. And so it really is your one-stop shop, everything you need to know. And then here again, you've got your tutor content, which, as I said, is the training material that you can integrate through SCORM into your learning management system, or simply use right here. It's got questionnaires, it's got interaction, etc. And we are coming soon with a new release of this, which will be even more interactive and trackable in terms of content. So you've got all of the data that you need, as I said, from a dedicated team. I think I've gone too far here and logged myself out. Excuse me. Here we go. All of that content is available right here and in context throughout the platform. So your teams can start to solve issues as they go along and start to get knowledge about those issues. As I said, testing is a great way to introduce accessibility gradually to your teams. They could be you could be directing them, for example, with the toolkit to run a certain set of tests. If I just open this again, and you can actually, restrict to certain topics and set this up so that it only tests certain topics and introduce them to testing gradually and fixing things gradually and the knowledge base as a source to actually solve those issues as they go along. And you're building up knowledge into teams. And then there comes a point where you're really trying to go from there to a full management of a full accessibility program. And this is really where those roles and projects come in. Okay, so as I mentioned, you can set up projects, and projects contain, you can have one data source. For instance, here in the web store, we've got our web store site, but you can also have that same web store appear in different projects, or just a portion of it. Maybe a particular team are in charge of one aspect of the web store, such as the shopping cart process. And so you pull that out. So you might be scanning that same flow here as part of the web store, but for that team, for the purpose of that team, let's just let them focus on the shopping cart flow itself, okay? And then you create a role for them with certain criteria. So if I go in, for instance, here in the web store and look at the roles, we've got team member and UX team. And if I go back a step and just look here at the web store key flows, we've just got our UX team, and they've got the ability to view this content, but not to manage it, okay? So we don't want them setting up their own scans. We just want them to come in and look at their data over time. We'll set up the scans for them. So you can build those, as I said, you can create any role you want and apply these different access roles to them. So you're essentially building up teams. So that can reflect your organization and how your organization is organized. And you invite people in, and then they will see the roll-ups and the dashboards and the reports that are relevant to them. Okay, and this is the way that you can separate out that data and make sure it goes into the right hands at all times. And there are a lot of powerful configuration options here. So if I go back here and go and have a look at our web store again. Okay, this is the actual web store domain scan that we have set up. And here's the data specifically on that score with its own trend line. And you can see here, we've got a lot of flexibility in terms of how you can scan that. So we've set up particular seed URLs, as we call them. So when it does a domain scan, it has a crawler, right? So it goes through your pages automatically. If you say, I want to scan 1,000 pages of my website, it can either go, it will follow the links, and it can either go linearly, so it can go across your landing pages and then go down a step and go to the next level of your pages, or you can have it choose randomly and simply pick pages, 1,000 pages at random. But you can also define jumping off points, okay? Pages that you definitely want to include, and also pages that will, for instance, here we're using the About Us landing page, but we're going to scan a minimum depth of 5 from that URL. Okay, so if your site is organized into different directories and so on, you can set each one up as a seed URL, and from there scan other pages and define how you want to scan randomly or linearly following the links. And you can define some pretty complex patterns in terms of the URLs that you want to include and you don't want to include. Okay, this is all part of the versatility of making sure that you're able to scan whatever you need. We're totally agnostic about the data, really. You want to get as much data as you can in different ways. And the point is, you can then use your customizable reporting to feed that data out in the right way. So just gather as much as you can, as flexibly as you can, and then feed it up to your teams in ways that they can properly digest. Okay. You can set authorization if it requires a login to get to that portion of your site. You can add Selenium type commands here, actions that will enable Arc to actually log in. Okay, and then start to scan from there. And lastly, you create a schedule in each case, and you can watch how those scans go. In this case, we had a failure here on a few occasions. And you create a schedule of how often you want to scan these things. Again, you want to get a fairly representative sample. When you're first doing discovery, you want to make sure that you get, on a regular schedule over time, so that you can understand what's a typical trend, and you can kind of take away from the data any temporary or contingent issues that might arise. So you really understand what's a typical state. And then when you see changes, you know this is something different and what caused it and so on. So you set up your scans to go on a regular basis and you watch them over time to set your baselines. You can also test with different variations. So at the moment, we're doing tests with the Chrome browser at a certain viewport, desktop 19920 by 1080, but you can have different browsers, Chrome, Safari, etc. You can use different desktop sizes, and you can scan all of these at the same time, and you can use obviously the Arc engine. And as I said, we support the Axe engine, and we'll be bringing that to the new version of our platform soon. So you can test in different ways, very versatile testing, right? You can test these different modalities, if you like. In the future, obviously, we're going to be adding other sources like mobile testing and PDF testing and so on. But it's still, even as it is, extremely comprehensive in terms of the content that we can capture. So all of that feeds up right to your dashboards, where you've got your teams you can basically build custom dashboards for your teams very quickly. You can set up filters. You can say, you can decide, for instance, on topics, if there are particular topics that either you can't do anything about, for example, it's a third-party iframe content that you're not in charge of, or it's something in here like parsing that that is producing a lot of false positives for you when you're scanning. You can simply take those things out and save it in a view, and then you have it to run that view whenever you need it. Okay. You can just look at certain things that are critical severity. You can set up a report here, for example, for your executive team, which is just your critical errors that you need to address. And you can even break it down in terms of the actual projects or sources. And all of that you can then save quickly, and that creates a view, give it a name, and their views are available here right at the top of the dashboard. So I've got an error zone. Just show me the errors rather than the alerts. And here I can see just the errors. And those are the only issues I want to look at in that case. So likewise, I can just create a view to just look at my website scan rather than my user flow. And I can switch easily between those views whenever I need to. So it's easy to customize the data for your different audiences. And we've got other visualizations in here as well, findings by category, findings by criterion. So you can look at your data in different ways, and there are data table alternatives for all of those. So we also have our API, which will allow you to output these Arc dashboards to your your other systems, for example, if you're using Tableau or some other kind of data visualization reports, you can use the API to integrate and send your data to those. Really, the sky's the limit. You can send issues to Jira, etc., and have people receive the data in that way. It's really a hub and spoke approach. You've got different data sources coming in, comes through here, and then can be sent out in different directions to different tools as needed, fully flexible. So that's the whole process. And I think I'll switch over now to have a look at some of your questions. I know I've only left about 5 minutes for that. Let's see if you've got any questions. I see a few things in the chat here. Nothing, no questions, I think.
Nope, I didn't see any, Charlie, at the moment in the chat either. So folks, if you have any questions, please post them either place. Yeah, it looks like no questions today. I am going to make sure that we send out the recording. And if folks are interested in getting a deeper dive or a personalized demo for your teams, we can always arrange that. You can reach out to us at ida@tpgi.com. I'm going to put it in the chat. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you.